Well, good morning. It's good to have the opportunity to share with you once again, and at this particular time and moment where you've gone into a time of transition as a church community. And in the light of that, I thought I would talk about this time of transition between Moses handing on to Joshua, and particularly the opening of Joshua. So we're going to have that as our reading now from Joshua and chapter 1. So, beginning at the first verse. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, "My servant Moses is dead. Now proceed to cross the Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the Israelites. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and the Lebanon as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea in the west shall be your territory. No one shall be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous. For you shall put this people in possession of the land that I swore to their ancestors to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to act in accordance with all the law that my servant Moses commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, so that you may be successful wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. You shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to act in accordance with all that is written in it. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you shall be successful. I hereby command you, be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Now, Joshua is one of those characters in the Old Testament that is particularly difficult to handle these days, because it's one of those characters that Richard Dawkins latches onto as the typical Christian, the typical believer, the typical religious person. In other words, all those accounts that we have in Joshua of violence, of turning out the people of Canaan and taking over the land, this is the violence of religion. And so I think when we approach Joshua these days, there is a little bit of nervousness about how do we handle this character in the light of this critique. Now, of course, Dawkins is one of those peoples that's setting up a particular paper tiger in order to knock him down, because every time I read a Dawkins book, I think, is that what a person of faith is? I don't believe that. I don't recognize that. And so there is a certain sensitivity, and we have to acknowledge that we have to come at Joshua through the way of Jesus. We interpret Joshua through our faith as Christians in Christ, the one who was the Prince of Peace, who came not bearing a sword, but kneeling to wash the feet of the disciples. So I want to speak a little bit about, I'm going to think about Joshua facing both ways. In other words, we're very used to looking at Joshua as the man of action man of the Old Testament almost, a sort of James Bond of the Old Testament. And in fact, James Bond is someone about whom could be said this by a certain Sebastian Faulks, who is a novelist. Sebastian Faulks, have any of you read any of his novels? Birdsong is probably his best known novel about the First World War and the tunnellers who did tunnels so that they could blow the enemy up, the Germans up. And Sebastian Faulks says about the novels of Bond, James Bond, Bond doesn't have an inner life. There'd be moments when I'd think, we need to gather our thoughts here and have a breather, where in another novel you'd slow the pace and have some description and see what Bond feels about this. But Bond doesn't reflect. All you can do is move on to the next Bond or shark or car. I think that's absolutely brilliant. Bond doesn't reflect, and certainly there's not much reflection that goes on in your normal Bond film. And what I want to say is that actually Joshua was not like a James Bond of the Old Testament. In order to be healthy, we need to face in two directions. We do need to face outward, to be active, to be engaged in the calling that we have been called to as human beings. But I believe also to be truly healthy, we need to face inward. We need to face inward to the place where we can encounter God within our own hearts and souls and spirits. In other words, there has to be an outer life, but there also has to be an inner life. Now, I'm choosing Joshua precisely because we would normally understand him as a man of action, a man who is engaged outwardly in the world, making a difference, helping the people take possession of the land that had been promised to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then repeated to Moses. Every step that you take will be land that I have given to you as your possession as the people of God. And so at Jericho, at Ai, and in the other ways, he was a man of action. But what is often missed is those references that clearly indicate that Joshua was much more than just a man of action facing outward. He was also a man who faced inward and had a rich inner life. And the outer and the inner life need to be in harmony so that we ourselves can be about our mission in our own time and in this time of transition that you as a community are facing at this time. And so I'm going to begin not with the outward facing Joshua, but the inner facing Joshua, using him as a model for all of us. Not just a model of a great leader, but the model of what it is to be a disciple of Christ. And so we're going to look at Joshua's inner life, his hidden inner facing life. And the first thing I want to draw to your attention is something in Exodus, when we have Joshua introduced to us. I think this is the first time we hear about Joshua. So Moses set out with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up into the mountain of God. And in Exodus you hear about Moses going up the mountain, into the cloud. And a writer who could have actually been in this part of the country wrote a book, an ancient book in very old English called The Cloud of Unknowing, based upon this action of Moses going up into the cloud of unknowing. And he uses that as an image of us moving into a relationship with God who can be known but remains unknown. We can know God truly, but we can never know God fully. There is a mystery about God. And so Joshua witnessed Moses in this relationship with God and observed it. He observed Moses in the cloud of unknowing, the cloud that hides God, as well as the place of encounter with God. Sometimes we can be too arrogant in our faith and thinking that we've got the truth. And that's true. We do believe that Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. But through Christ we know God truly as Father, but we don't know God fully, because if we don't understand and know all that is about the known universe, which we don't, even the accumulated wisdom and interrogation and investigation of human beings has not exhausted even what there is to know about this world. In fact, knowledge seems to be growing exponentially about the world, and there is yet still more to know, and there will always be more to know. How much more then is there to know about the God that we know as the one who is Father, Abba, through Jesus Christ? So we know God truly, but we know God truly, but we don't know him fully. And it was Moses who encountered that, and it was Joshua who was witnessing that foundation that has become the foundation of both the faith of Israel, the Jewish people, and of course those who follow through the way of Christ. So Joshua was brought to an encounter with God. And so there's another very interesting reference to Joshua, and that is that we're talking here about the wilderness and the wanderings in the wilderness. And they had a tent, a meeting that was commanded by God to be established, a place where Moses, no longer able to go up the mountain, but there was a meeting place that was set aside outside the camp of Israel, and he would go there to meet with God. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Then he would return to the camp, but his young assistant, Joshua, son of Nun, would not leave the tent of meeting. That's interesting, isn't it? So you have Joshua, his young assistant, not only going up the mountain and encountering and witnessing what Moses encountered with God in the cloud. You have Moses here leaving his assistant Joshua in the tent of meeting. Why did he remain there? He was someone clearly that had a rich awareness of needing to be in that place, which we have been in this morning through being led into worship, being led in our prayers. He had a rich inner-facing life and encounter with God that was modelled to him by Moses. And he absorbed this into his own way and practice in his life. So, there was that inner-facing life of Joshua. But he does as well have a life outwardly facing his mentor, who set the target, who laid down the pattern, who actually was able to actually establish Joshua in the way that he would lead the people of God into the future. And so it's important that we actually choose our mentors and who we look to well within the Christian pathway, that we are attentive to those things that will actually nourish and build us up in that way that will bring us into a rounded and a mature faith, and one that is robust and that can help us be established. And so Moses passed over the responsibility to Joshua, and Joshua was commanded by God into his public facing role. And this is the passage that we've just read, where this transition begins to take place. And in this you'll notice that actually on 3 occasions it says, you must be strong and very courageous, or strong and courageous. 3 times it's repeated. And when there's a repetition like that in ancient literature, it's not just this is important, this is very, very, very important. Pay attention to this. Be strong and courageous. What does it mean to be strong and courageous? Is it just for those people that, as it were, are up front in positions of leadership in God's church or wherever? Is it a Christian who's in some leadership role in public society who has to be strong and very courageous? Sure, yes, they do. And it will be difficult to be a Christian in such a position. But it's also something that we all have to have, to be strong and courageous. Because here is Joshua, who's now lacking in his mentor. Moses has gone, and Joshua has to come into his place and enter into his own role. And so it says, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. The Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I believe that each of us needs courage and strength to be our own person, to be truly who God made us to be. There's an Austrian poet and writer of the 20th century, Ingeborg Bachmann, and she was an incredible mind and a very thoughtful person, and one of her sayings has always stuck with me. It's this: it's amazing how long it takes to take your place in your own life. It's amazing how long it takes to take your place in your own life. Increasingly, we've come to see and acknowledge, and there are great thinkers, yes, throughout history, but even into the 20th century, who have come to see that actually so much of what we understand and learn, it's all been given to us from outside of us. We are brought into relationship through the ones that love us and nurture us. And if that's done well, we will have a strong sense of our own identity. But we have to learn at a certain point to enter into the fullness of our own self. We have to become our own true self that has been made in the image of God. And that is not easy. Why? Because we tend to compare ourselves with other people. And what do we do when we compare? What we compare is our weaknesses with other people's strengths. I bet you that's what we do. We always do that. Oh, I'm not like her. I'm not like him. I can't do that. Oh, you know. And so we start self-condemning. And it takes strength. It takes actually that relationship with God to enter into our own self. I grew up in a family and I had a very extrovert sister who was very bright and sharp and energetic. I was the shy one. I was the one who tended to be retreated. I didn't have confidence socially. And whereas she was very fast thinking and sat exams and not only got through them but excelled at them, and she got scholarships to go to Sutton High School for the girls, a public day school in our local area, and she won a scholarship, whereas I struggled through. I preferred to watch television and be lazy, and so I failed the 11 plus and went off to Glastonbury High School on the St Helier estate, just round the corner. And I can always remember feeling as though I wasn't as good as my sister. I always compared myself to her. And I thought to myself as a young man, some people seem to have a silver spoon in their mouth when they're walking. My sister seemed to have a whole canteen of cutlery. You know, I looked to her and I thought, she's so strong, she's not what I am. Do you know what delivered me from that? It was when I came to a faith in God as my Father. As a young man of 17, I had this deep experience of really realising that God was Father, therefore I was a child of God, a son of God. And therefore I had to take myself seriously as someone who had been made in the image of God. And I began on that painful, slow journey that all of us have to go on to take my place in my own life and become the person that I was meant to be. And sometimes there comes a point where it's bad to be looking to the person that has actually taught us. Jesus said to his disciples on one occasion, "It's better that I go away." Why? Because while Jesus was around physically, they wouldn't have been able to do the things that they were then later able to do. And actually our mentors can become a block at a certain point, and we need them to actually fade out of our life so that we can enter into our own lives. And we are always doing this work of growing into our maturity. And even in my 70s, I still feel that there's more yet for me to grow into as a child of God. So we need strength and courage to be drawn into our own person. That's the first thing that Joshua, I want to draw out about Joshua's outward-facing life. Secondly, you shall put this people in possession of the land. Now, I guess not many of us are going to be great military leaders here. I think those days aren't going to come to us particularly, even though we've had this fright in Europe in these last 12 months. So we can't easily just transpose the tasks of Joshua to our tasks. In fact, I think sometimes Joshua can be handled in such a way that it becomes insensitive, and actually Joshua is used as some kind of tribal model that sort of establishes a sort of tribal victorious mentality within Christian circles. I think that is playing into the hands of someone like Richard Dawkins. It is not helpful to actually use the story of Joshua in that way. We have to say, yes, that was his task for that day. And I could talk a lot about what was actually going on there within that whole movement of entering into the land. I haven't got time to do that. But what might our tasks be today? What are we called to participate in as the people of God, as a child of God? Let me just mention, there are those things that you personally are called to do that is unique to you. But I want to just mention a name, and I can do no more than name them, is to just name some of the things that we have to do and face in our general life together, as it were, as all Israel, as part of Israel today. Like Joshua was being told to do this task for Israel. What are our tasks today? Let me just mention three. A cosmic task. We have to be part of recognising that what humanity has done to this creation is little short of disastrous. And we have to participate actively. And we have to take seriously, actively, the whole issue and crisis of climate change and the total collapse of biodiversity within our country. When I was young, when I was in my teens, you'd drive through the countryside and you'd see lapwings. Absolute crowds of lapwings. They've gone. They've gone. Because of the way that we're handling this creation. And part of our task is to share in our common humanity and the task that has been given to it in order to actually rise up and to face this challenge of climate change and the biodiversity crisis that we face. We must take this seriously. And would that our political leaders would put this centre and not allow the urgent to squeeze out the important, and to give proper emphasis to what is, I believe, an existential crisis that we are facing as a human race and as a whole creation. There is a cosmic calling that all of us can participate in, even in small ways, within our lifestyle and the way that we conduct ourselves. How can we, who believe and glory in the God who is our Creator, not take God's creation seriously? I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted, and you're all saying, Amen, in your spirits, even if you're not saying it out loud. There's a cosmic task. There's a national task, I think, as well. Let me just mention one. I think one of the things that's concerned me as I sought to read the signs of the times, which we are commanded to do. Read the signs of the times. At a national level, and actually it's beyond just the nation, I believe there is a crisis concerning how truth is handled in public life. And I believe that this is very serious. Very serious. And that we need integrity in national leadership, and that has been failing us at times in recent years. And we must pray for our leaders, irrespective of the parties that they're in, that they will be and that they will take seriously integrity in public life. Otherwise, there are real dangers that will face this country if we don't do this. So there is a national thing that we should actually be part of, and we should be praying for within our public life. And what about the church? Not just this church, but I mean the church generally. I believe that one of the things that we are called to do is to know how to hold our faith and the uniqueness of our faith in a way that will actually serve in a society that by and large is, at a practical level, atheistic. In other words, without God in public consciousness. in public discourse? When was the last time you had a God conversation within a group of people in your place of work or in your neighbourhood? God just doesn't enter into the conversation whatsoever. You're more likely to have a conversation about God with a Muslim than you are with your average white person on the street. You are much more likely. Because at that practical level, there is no belief, and there are multi-beliefs. And we as the church have to know how to handle ourselves well in that society so that we can be both humble but also true to the uniqueness of what we bring. Humble so that we can seek men and women of peace, as Jesus told his disciples to go and do, so that we can cooperate with other people who are beyond the church, and we have to do that as well. Holding on to the uniqueness of what we have and that preciousness of knowing what God has been revealed to us through Christ as the one who is our Father, our Abba, the one in whom we live and move and have our being. So, we have to take possession of the land in these sorts of ways and in many other ways that we are particularly personally called to do. And finally, notice it says, you shall meditate on this book of the law day and night, for then you shall make your way prosperous and then you shall be successful. Day and night, Joshua, you have got to be reflecting on what has been given to you through Moses. Pay attention to it. Let it shape you. Let it form you so that you can become the people that God intended you to be. And it was a very clear task that they were called to be. They were called to be an alternative kind of people within that society there. In other words, what we find, even in his day-to-day public ministry, there was, in fact, it was suffused with inner life activity, of reflection, of giving space to ponder God, to ponder what the meaning of that word was, the word that had come through the way of Moses. So facing both ways. Yes, we are called to take part in the evangelization of the world, as it says in our Declaration of Principle as Baptists. But we also need to emphasize that we're called to develop inner life. Can I just end with two suggestions about your inner life? The first is that you should ask yourself and get into the practice of saying, where have I met with the life-giving God today? Where have I met with the life-giving God today? Even when you're going through a tough time, where have I met with the life-giving God? It might be just the simplest of experiences, looking at something in your garden. It might be just seeing an encounter between a mother and child or between a group of friends, and you just notice something about it and it warms your heart and you think, that's really good, that's healthy, that's life-giving. You're touching at that point the spirit of life. You're observing it, you're seeing it, you're encountering it. It may be striking you deep in your heart. Ponder that. Where have I met with a life-giving God today? What a great prayer that is. A prayer exercise to do. And the other one is drawn from a tradition called the Benedictines. Benedict was the beginning of the Western monastic movement. And they would have a practice of what they called stasis. And by stasis, they meant coming to a standstill We get our word static from the word stasis. And what Benedictines would practice is that before going on from one activity to the next and just bouncing through their day, they would pause. And they would just open themselves to God afresh and anew. And they would just draw breath before going on to the next thing. Today, we can fill our lives up with so much. And with our mobile devices, we can be bombarded with so much that there's precious little stasis in our lives. How about trying to build that in to your day? But when you move from one activity to the next, you just, thank you, Lord, for doing the washing up. Oh, well, maybe not. You know what I mean? Trying to punctuate the day so that we can come to an awareness of God in all things and in all ways. God bless you as you enter into this time. God be with you and enrich you, and let us continue to face both ways. Outwards, but also inwards, where Christ dwells in our hearts.